Hello, good day. Welcome everyone to this webinar, North American Market Access Requirements. What you need to know as a KNX member. My name is Jesus Arias. I'm your host today, representing KNX Association. And with me, I have already a friend of our community, Joaquin Gomez. He's EMC Wireless Senior Product Service Specialist for the EMEA region. He's an expert in UL certification, and he accepted the challenge today to give us guidance for our community, KNX members, what are the requirements for us to bring our products to the KNX market in the USA. Okay, so Joaquin, I think you are live. Yeah, there you are. I lost you for a minute. So welcome to your stage. We have a very good community of KNX members here with us today who are very eager to learn what they need to do in order to tap into this very important market for us as a community. So the stage is yours. Also, just a quick reminder, there will be a Q&A at the end. So Joaquin is going to carry on his presentation, and please use the Q&A section. At the end of his presentation, we'll bring these questions for his expertise. Joaquin, stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Jesus. And hi and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Joaquin Gomez and I will be today's speaker. In this webinar, we will be talking about the following topics. So first of all, we will start with a brief introduction about UL solutions. Then I will concentrate on the North American market access related to FCC and Industry Canada requirements. And I will use three different examples to explain how these FCC and Industry Canada processes works in different scenarios. As Jesus mentioned, I am Joaquin Gomez. I work in UL Solutions since 9 years. I am currently the business responsible for electromagnetic compatibility and wireless in EMEA. I have a technical background on EMC and radio testing and certification, and my goal is to support customers to understand market requirements and how UL can help manufacturers to reach Europe and North American market access. So let's start with a brief introduction of UL Solutions. Now, UL Solutions, many of you already know, is a global leader in testing, inspection, and certification. We have been in the market for more than 125 years. So we have a lot of experience when it comes to product testing and certification. We have a global network of employees. UL is a global enterprise, and we have a global network of employees and laboratories, which allows us to support our customers locally towards a global market access. We can support you on market access for more than 150 countries around the globe. Today, we will be talking about FCC and industry market access requirements. So let's start with FCC. Now, FCC probably is the most known even logo against Industry Canada. So FCC actually is the US regulator of electromagnetic compatibility and especially the use of spectrum for radio transmitters. And depending the product category, there's two different processes or two different routes. So there's route number one, which is also called Supplier Declaration of Conformity, or SDOC. And this is a self-declaration scheme. It is applicable in general for non-radio transmitter devices, also called non-intentional or unintentional radiators. Route number two is the certification scheme. And here, this is in general mandatory for radio transmitters. So as we were saying, They are also called intentional radiators. This is the FCC way of the definition. Now, when it comes to the supplier declaration of conformity, as mentioned, it is a self-declaration scheme. So the manufacturer needs to write down a declaration saying that the product is in conformity, but before doing that, needs to be able to demonstrate compliance. Now, the compliance in this case typically is demonstrate against the so-called FCC Rule Par 15 Subpart B. This is in general the most common rule part. We are not talking about standard, but we are talking about rule parts. So it's FCC legislation, US legislation. And this is addressing the EMC requirements. If you want to consider some equivalent in Europe, this will be more related to the EMC directive. Now, once the manufacturer has tested against the specific rule part, then the responsible party issues the US declaration of conformity, this supplier declaration of conformity. This is similar to what we are used in Europe, like the CE marking, when typically this is a self-declaration scheme. Now, one important thing here is this supplier declaration of conformity needs to be together with the product. This can be in the user manual. This can be a separate document that accompanies the every single product that is in the market. Now, who is writing this supplier declaration of conformity? This is written by or signed by the responsible party. And the responsible party is someone that has physical address in the US. The reason for that is if FCC finds out there's an issue with the product in the market due to market surveillance or due to any questions related to the product, this responsible party will be the first go-to contact person associated to your company. Now, this responsible party can be the manufacturer himself if it has manufacturing in the US, or it can be even the importer, the distributor, someone that has an agreement with the manufacturer and takes somehow local responsibility of the product in the US market. FCC has written down a guidance explaining what SDOC is, what the responsible party is, and what the characteristics needs to have, and also has given an example of an idea of what is the supplier declaration of conformity. So as you can see here, this is an example. This is something to follow, I would say. If you are familiar with the CE marking and the declaration of conformity, many of these items are also present in the CE declaration of conformity, which is the model name of the product, who is the responsible party, or who is saying that the product is in compliance in this case. And at the very end, there is a standard statement. And this statement also, in some cases, in the specific case of FCC 15B, needs to be written in the supplier declaration of conformity, but also needs to be part of the label of the product. And then there's route 2. So up to here, everything that it was related to a digital circuits or devices that contains electronics, or even devices that contains a pure receiver. In this second route, we are having a look into intentional radiators, or also the so-called radio transmitters. Now, this is a certification scheme. And the process requires 2 steps. Step number 1 is you need to perform testing against FCC rules. Depending on the standard, you will be considering FCC 15C or 15E. Maybe it's a Wi-Fi 5 gigahertz. You will need to have a look in which rule part you need to test, but you need to test against in an authorized and accredited test laboratory like UL Solutions. Once the test report is obtained, then This report, together with a set of documentation, which is user manual, labeling, instructions, operation functionality of the product, block diagrams, and many others, it will be required from the so-called telecommunication certification body. Telecommunication certification body, or TCB, is the certification body that will take this documentation and this report, will review everything, and then as the end part of the process will upload this documentation into the FCC portal and will issue the FCC grant. At this point, and not before, the manufacturer can sell the device with a radio transmitter into the US market. This is, you cannot sell a device if it's not certified and it has a radio transmitter, and this radio transmitter is not FCC certified. Now, let's talk a little bit about also Canada. The first thing you understand here is Canada is a totally different and separate, obviously, country with its own regulatory requirements. Also, Canada has a market access requirement for electromagnetic compatibility and radio devices. So ISET Canada, which is Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, or Industry Canada, is the regulator, the local regulator, the national regulator in Canada, is somehow equivalent to the FCC in Canadian territory, and also again regulates the electromagnetic compatibility and radio requirements for radio and non-radio devices. Something that needs to be very clear is there's a misconception of FCC only being applicable when my device contains radio or a radio transmitter. That's not exactly.
Was I in the ISET Canada, I guess. So sorry for the inconvenience. I don't know what happened. We were talking about ISET Canada. Now, this means that Industry Canada has standards for the unintentional radiator. This is somehow slightly different from FCC because these standards are covering the different product categories, whereas some standard, the rule part for FCC 15B is very broad. So you can see, for example, here there's ISO 005 for lighting equipment, but then it goes to ISO 003 for information technology equipment. So you will need to have a look into which standard may be applicable and then test and issue the report regarding this. Now, also Industry Canada has a second route, and the second route is somehow very similar to FCC. This is a certification route in a device that has a wireless transmitter or intentional radiator, then, and it's not certified against Industry Canada requirements, then you will be following a two-step process. First of is going to be testing in a lab. This lab needs to be obviously accredited against Canadian standards. Once the testing is done for radio and EMC, you will move these reports to a foreign certification body. Foreign certification body, or FCB, is the certification body that will review the documentation, will review the reports, send it to ISET Canada, and it's going to be ISET Canada in this case who will issue the certificate and not the certification body. So UL as TCB and FCB are part of the review phase. The TCB of UL will be issuing your FCC grant certificate. Instead, for Canada, our FCB are going to be moving documentation to Canada, and then Canada will be issuing your certificate. Here is an example of the most typical radio-related standards. Here you find things like RSS 247. This RSS 247 covers a vast amount of wireless technologies. For example, there's Bluetooth in here, there's 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, there's also 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, also the Zigbee and Thread may be somehow allocated into this standard. Somehow this is similar in terms of concept and technology of the European EN 300.328. Differently, for example, RSS 247 is covering also 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, whereas there's a different standard in Europe that is covering especially the 5 gigahertz frequency band. So here you have an example of the different standards. You may have a look. RSS 210, this is for short range device, the equivalent of 433, or for 868, the North American is 915 megahertz short range device. Also, somehow RFID technologies are part of this standard. You also have a look into this RSS 102. What you also need to be aware is when we are talking about radio testing. Radio testing, if you are familiar with the Radio Equipment Directive, you know that the Radio Equipment Directive has multiple requirements, has the EMC requirement, has the radio spectrum requirement, Article 3.2. But there's also Article 3.1a, which is human exposure to electromagnetic fields. You need to remember the fact that a radio transmitter generates electromagnetic fields to operate. And these electromagnetic fields are somehow absorbed by human body skin. And obviously, this can create health issues. So, like in Europe, US and Canada has requirements that are not purely use of spectrum, but also have human exposure requirements as we have for Europe. This RSS 102 is also covering these requirements that can be from the SAR testing to the what we call maximum permissible exposure calculation, the MPE calculation. This is again is to address, it's part of the legislation for US and Canada, and it's also part of what we need to address to demonstrate that the product is in compliance with FCC and Industry Canada rules. Now, up to here, we've been talking about, in general, how to access the market, how to approach the market itself when it comes to a non-wireless or a wireless transmitter. Let's have a look into 3 different examples that may go from the more complex, the less complex to the more complex, to have a look how we can apply these specific requirements. Now, the first one is a non-radio device. This is a unintentional radiator. Okay. In this case, this is a relay actuator, this is AC mains powered, and is connected via Ethernet. So there's no wireless, the Ethernet is taking care of the communication part. Now, as you understand, the market access for these FCC and Industry Canada may apply, and we will be following on both cases the unintentional radiator part, which is the supplier declaration of conformity. This means that step number 1, we need to do testing. And in this case, we are testing against FCC rule part 15, subpart B. Subpart B is a very broad part which is taking care of everything that has digital circuits. Similarly for Canada, we may have a look into this device as an information technology device, and in this case we can have a look into the ISO 003. Okay, now the requirements for both cases are only emissions. One of the things you need to be familiar is, whereas in Europe, when we're talking about EMC and EMC directive, the EMC concept has both emissions and immunity. So we need somehow to demonstrate compliance that the emissions of the device are within a certain limits, conducted, radiated emissions, and also the device can withstand certain levels of immunity coming from the ESD to the Sarge, depending the port, depending the product category. Instead, when it comes to FCC and Industry Canada, what we are doing here is we are only testing emissions. So FCC and Industry Canada only have requirements to emissions, which is radiated emissions as enclosure, and then conducted emissions. Also, another thing to consider here, in the conducted emissions, we are only having a look into everything that can be at a certain stage connected to the AC mains. If a device is connected by DC, it's a DC power, but DC power is at some point connected to the AC mains through an AC-DC converter. Then also conducted emissions are applicable with a representative power supply, AC-DC. If instead the device is powered by a non-rechargeable battery, then in this case, it cannot be connected to the AC mains into any means, and then conducted emissions may not be applicable, only radiated emissions. Okay, so this is just to show you that FCC only considers the emissions requirements of the EMC. Just a note in here, I have not been mentioning anything related to UL standards or the electrical safety part, because somehow it's not part of the scope of this webinar. I am aware that depending the product category, there may be a UL standard covering the electrical safety requirements of a product that may require some immunity test in that electrical safety standard. That's a different story regarding FCC and Industry Canada requirements. And you will need to assess the product on both. So on the UL standards, maybe including EMC immunity tests related to the safety function, but also regarding the FCC and Industry Canada rule parts and standards, which is emissions into the EMC. Now, once you have done the testing, you have a test report. With this test report, always remember the fact that the responsible party needs to write down this declaration, supplier declaration of conformity. This declaration needs to be put together with every product in the user manual or with a separate document inside the box where the product is. And also very important, always consider that FCC and Industry Canada has both user manual and labeling requirements. So if you remember the statement that was in the supplier declaration of conformity example, at the very end, it was an FCC indication. This indication needs to be in the labeling of the product, depending on the product category, but in general, that may be the case. So there's going to be an FCC statement in your label. Also, Industry Canada may have labeling requirements, and both FCC and Industry Canada will have also user manual statements that are mandatory to be present in the user manual. Something also to be mentioned here is that because of Canada, you will need to consider also writing these statements in French due to the fact that it is mandatory for Canada to have both English and French version. So that's case one. Non-wireless digital circuits, how to approach a pure EMC scenario. Let's move to the next one. Let's add into a different product wireless transmitter. Now, in this second scenario, we're having a look into an air sensor, which is battery powered, and we have a thread radio, which is certified. What does it mean it is certified? Well, actually, and typically you may find in the market radio modules that are already FCC and Industry Canada certified as a module. So similarly to the European approach, you can find CE-mark radio modules that then have already addressed the radio equipment directive, and you integrate that radio module in your host or end product. Similarly here. So this radio module is already FCC and Industry Canada certified because there is acceptance of modular approval for US and Canada. And again, it is certified as a module. So in this case, we are in a hybrid scenario where the radio part has already been certified. So the end product manufacturer, so also called host manufacturer, who integrates that radio module at the end product level, obviously, first of all, needs to have a look into the installation instructions of the radio module. And in these instructions, you may find some areas to pay attention. Maybe the radio module does not have the antenna, or maybe the radio module needs to be placed in a certain way. So the first thing to do is have a look into that installation guidance from the radio module manufacturer. Because for FCC and Industry Canada certification, the certificates will have some conditions. In UL, to use the UL terms, it may have conditions of acceptability. This means that maybe this radio module has been certified with certain conditions. For example, the use of the radio part with 20 centimeters to human body. If this is the case, the end product manufacturer needs to consider that in order to, I am using the radio module as per the grant, or I am modifying somehow the conditions. So it is very important to have a look what are the installation of the radio module, but also to have a look into the FCC grant conditions, okay? If the radio module is used according to all the grant conditions and installed in the product according to all these grant conditions, then the host manufacturer is required to perform, again, the supplier declaration of conformity, cover the EMC somehow testing we've been talking about, and as you typically do in Europe, also FCC has a guidance where it strongly recommends to perform some radio integration investigation. So if for Europe, when we are installing the radio module in an end product, typically the end product manufacturer does the EMC entirely and also does some radio checks. Typically, these are the radiated spurious emission at the end product level. Also, FCC has a similar guidance that says at the very end, the host manufacturer needs to demonstrate the product sold into the market is in compliance. So it is strongly recommended that the host manufacturer performs this radiated spurious emission at the end product level in order to demonstrate that the radio module is certified. You integrate this radio module in a host environment where you have your PCB, your traces, your enclosure, your wiring. None of these elements that you have in the end product are affecting the complete conformity. That's the main concept of this radiated spurious emission. I'm adding a radio module which is certified into a host product. This host product is a different environment as how the radio module is being tested standalone. So I am responsible of the end product, and I want to demonstrate that also the radio part that I have integrated is within conformity. This guidance is following again the same guidance that we have in Europe, because there is the experience that if I'm using a radio module which is already approved and I integrate this into a host product, it can happen that the host product, for whatever reason, maybe there's a trace close to the antenna, it's amplifying the spurios. It does not mean that the end product is going to be in compliance just because the radio model it is. So I go back again to underline the fact that this end product manufacturer who integrates that radio model, which is responsible of the entire product to the market. So when FCC says, I strongly recommend this, is because they know it may be that without this testing, it's very difficult to demonstrate the compliance. Okay. Now, once I have done this EMC testing, I have written down the supplier declaration of conformity. I have done the partial radio testing, radiated spurious emission. I am good to go to sell the product to the market. There's not going to be any further certification because the radio part is already certified. I'm not changing anything. I have done some partial testing, and that's enough in order to sell the product. Please also consider different things. User manual requirements, same as the EMC, as we mentioned before. Also in the user manual, you will, in many occasions, need to write down some of the installation requirements that the module manufacturer says. So the module manufacturer says this needs to be used in with a 20 centimeters distance from human body or higher. Your end product will need also in the user manual to integrate this kind of sentence. And the labeling. Also in here, the labeling will be the FCC statement and the Industry Canada requirement. But when you integrate a radio module and you are not doing a certification on your own, but you are reusing the module certification, please remember to indicate in the labeling of the product contains FCC ID and the FCC ID of the module. Same thing for Canada, contains EC number and the EC number of the radio module. This means that my product has a radio part, and I'm saying this in the labeling, but the radio part is already certified by the radio module manufacturer, and I'm reusing that. So I'm not certifying my device. Okay. And now let's jump to the, I would say, more complex scenario. And this complex scenario is, well, actually, this thread radio part, it's not a radio module. It's a chipset. It's something coming from the chipset vendor, and I have done my own design. I have put the chipset with the oscillator or the quartz. I have then done all the antenna path with the different components, the antenna matching. I have designed the antenna, or I have used an external antenna, both in the market. So the design is mine. This is not a radio model. This is a chipset. So in this case, we are in the scenario where we need to do certification. So the radio transmitter is not certified. Okay, because of these, we will be doing a full testing and a full certification that can be done whether at the end product level, or that can be done at the radio module level. For example, there may be scenarios where I have a manufacturer that has designed its own radio module that will be integrated in multiple of their end product devices. We can test and certify the radio module and then integrate these as in scenario 2 or case study 2. Okay, let's assume in this case we are having a look into an end product. So we will need to do EMC testing. So EMC testing is something you need to consider in the 3 stages. The difference in this stage is because we are going to do an FCC and Industry Canada certification, the supplier declaration of conformity will not be applicable as declaration of conformity, but because we are going to go through a certification, which is a more stronger process. However, the EMC testing will need to be done anyway. So in the three scenarios, you have a commonality, which is EMC testing needs to be addressed every time. Then on top of these, you will need to do nothing. If there's no radio, you will need to do radiated spurious emission if the radio model is already certified, or you will need to add that full radio testing, which is a complete set of tests only to the transmitter part. So as you may be familiar, in Europe, for Article 3.2 radio equipment directive, we are considering the transmitter aspects, but also how the receiver is efficient. In US and Canada, they are only considering the transmitter requirements. For the receiver requirements, somehow they are covered under the digital circuits of the non-transmitter part or the unintentional radiator part. Okay, and this is going to be covered under the EMC part you need to cover together with the radio part. In here again, you are going to be doing testing in an accredited test lab for radio. You will receive the reports. With these reports, again, always within UL, we will be going through the telecommunication certification body, foreign certification body, and they will be reviewing your documentation, your test reports, and issuing certificates or sending these to Canada to issue certificates. Okay. Also in the certification part, there's going to be user manual requirements. There's going to be labeling requirements. For example, in this case, you will not have the contains FCC-ID, but you will have the FCC-ID because you are the one that are certifying the product. Okay. So up to here, the technical part of the presentation. Again, this is just a very high-level overview. Every scenario, every product type needs to be analyzed to understand what is the product category, what product or what radio technology is present. Some cases there may be multiple radio technologies in a product, so this needs to be assessed. But just to mention that in UL, obviously, we have a vast experience when it comes to testing regarding FCC and Industry Canada requirements, both into the EMC and into the radio. Our labs are fully accredited in order to perform this testing. We have telecommunication certification body and foreign certification body for the certification part of the process. We have multiple labs in Europe, so we can help you as close as possible to you to make this local in terms of testing. We have especially 3 labs in Europe for EMC and radio, 1 in the UK, 1 in Germany in Stuttgart, another one in Milan in Italy. Both the 3 labs has FCC accreditation and can perform testing and use that report for certification schemes. We have also telecommunication certification body across. It's a team of people in Europe, across Europe. So there's someone in Germany, someone in Italy, so one in UK that can help you with that certification process. And we are here to help. So also if you may have questions, you want to have a look into your specific case of your product and what you need to do, we can have a look together how to assess. We can follow with you the entire process. Always remember, be prepared with what you need to do, the standards and the requirements, but also you can even prepare with the so-called pre-compliance testing. So before going to the full testing, and when it's too late, maybe to have a failure, and then you need to go back to the whole process of development of the process, my recommendation is have a look into everything related to the pre-compliance test. To have a look, we can help you also in our labs to check if the product is already close or far away from compliance, and based on that, understand how to move forward to the entire process. So with this, I thank you very much for your attention, Again, apologize for the audio issue we had earlier. I hope I have recovered everything and everyone, and we can maybe open up for questions. Now, we still have few minutes for questions. For any questions that we are not able to answer now, I have my email address in here. So if you can write directly to me, or you can write to Jesus, and Jesus will pass it to me. I'm happy to help with any questions. So with this, we open to any questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you very much, Joaquin. Yeah, well, that happened with a microphone. It's a live event, and those things happen. So I do appreciate the patience of our participants. So there's quite a few questions here. I also want to let you know that there was another edition of a webinar on a similar topic about the UL requirements for North America market. So now we are bundling these two recordings, so then you get a full overview with both recordings. It is a very broad subject, and it's difficult to cover everything in one go. So, okay, Joaquin, we have a few questions. Well, quite a few. Let me start with some of these questions. Okay, so one question is, can I reuse my European radio emissions directive test reports for North American market access requirements? Because apparently Europe is more stringent for radio devices than FCC.
Sure. Well, actually, this is a question that we receive a lot, because obviously we have as a manufacturer already spent time and money into doing market access for Europe, and we see, well, actually, in general, there is this idea now that Europe may have, because has both transmitter and receiver and immunity and EMC. Well, actually, I'm testing more for Europe. The answer is no, because there may be differences in terms of the standard itself. There may be difference in terms of the limits itself. For Europe, in certain cases, I don't know, conducted emissions in the AC mains, we are going to be doing this at 230 volts AC. In the US, we are going to be using the US ratings, 120 volts AC. So there's also differences in terms of the product ratings and the characteristics. When it comes to radio, it's even because FCC and Canada are very formal. They only will accept test reports performed against the FCC and Industry Canada standards. FCC and Industry Canada will never accept the reports coming from an European standard that may be very similar in terms of way of measuring. However, they will not accept because of multiple factors. And one of them is the way we do the setup, the way we do the measurement will be very equivalent, but this is not acceptable. There is an MRA between US and Europe, but this MRA is not to accept reports from a European standard, but this is to allow European test labs to test against FCC and Industry Canada standards. So again, when it comes to EMC, the answer is no, but especially for radio, and especially we are talking about radio testing and certification, there is no way these test reports from Europe can be accepted to be reused between FCC and Industry Canada.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Let's try to squeeze 2 or 3 more questions if possible.
Sure.
It says another question. I understand that for UL, the factory must be UL certified too. Is that similar to FCC?
Say it again. Repeat again.
I understand that for UL certification, the factory must be UL certified too. Is that similar for FCC?
In here, so when it comes to UL, this is because there's a UL mark. The UL mark does inspections. So our auditors go to that manufacturer plant to check that the product is being manufactured with the critical components, etc., etc., etc. That's the way the inspections for the UL mark. FCC and Industry Canada does not have anything similar. So the only condition you need to consider is when you do the testing, this test needs to be done in an accredited test lab. Because if you do this testing in a non-accredited lab, and then that may be technically capable to do the testing, but they don't have the proper accreditation. With these reports sent to the certification body will need to reject. One of the things they check is the test report, where the test report comes from, what is the accreditation of that test lab, because this is one of the mandatory areas that the certification body will have a look, and potentially this may be rejected for the application. So there's no such a manufacturer plant inspection or accreditation or certification. The one we are dealing with is the test lab. Once the test lab is accredited, we issue the reports, and those reports are fine to go to the certification route.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and a quick one, also to clarify, because there's always a bit of misunderstanding with the UL and FCC. Someone asked, don't you also need UL besides FCC?
The answer is yes. This depends on the product category, and the location in the North America you want to access, because one state may require UL mark and UL certification, and a different state may require only an international report. What you need to consider is what I mentioned today is the EMC and radio requirements for the market access of North America. This is one piece of a puzzle of a total of several pieces you need to collect in order to be able to sell the product in North America. The UL mark or the testing against the UL standard may be a second element that is required for that market access. Okay, so not because I did not mention today regarding the UL and the UL certification or the UL standard, this does not mean that there's no safety requirements for the market access. There are, but this webinar was concentrated into the North American market access, EMC and radio, which is FCC and Industry Canada. FCC and Industry Canada, just to clarify, are totally independent from UL. UL can test and certify against FCC and Industry Canada, but FCC and Industry Canada has nothing to do with the UL mark or the UL testing and certification and UL standards. They are totally different things, and probably you will need both, or even more than this, both. There may be cybersecurity requirements, etc., energy efficient requirements. So there are multiple pieces you need to consider for that market access. We concentrated today only into the EMC and radio market access requirements.
Okay, thank you, Joaquin. I think we will need you to bring you again in the future, because there is a lot of comments, questions, and a lot of guidance is required. For sure, they can contact you if they need any further assistance, but we appreciate that you spent this time putting or giving us guidance on this topic, which complements very well your first webinar with us already, which we will put together and share with our members, so they already have a very good guidance for North American market. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your effort. The recording will be available to our members. Don't worry, we will handle that. Other than that, we hope you have a very good day, and thank you, Joaquin, one more time for your help. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brad. Have a nice day. Bye.